Well, we're outside the Wedge Co-op at Sidney, May 17, 2016.
That's all right. You can still sign up.
And we are trying to get signatures on a ballot petition for the legal marijuana ticket. In Minnesota, we can't do what they did in Colorado.
And fear is the enemy of freedom. A fearful people will give up their freedom. They won't get security in exchange. They'll just feel more insecure and more fearful. So here we have people who won't sign the petition or who scribble their names so nobody can read it, thinking that somehow by doing that, they're going to be safe. Safe from what? They're afraid of, they don't know what. We have the right to do exactly this, to petition for redress of grievances. That's the First Amendment. You know, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, and freedom to assemble and petition for redress of grievances. If you go to Oregon, or Alaska, or California, or Colorado, or Massachusetts, Maine, soon Michigan, not yet, but soon, Nevada, people standing in line to buy marijuana in Nevada. Hey, no paranoia, no hassle, just freedom.
But
it works.
They still don't have a place to smoke it, right? I mean, a tourist doesn't have a place to smoke it.
That's something that got left out in one of these compromises that people are told you got to compromise, you got to give up. It's when you're trying to get a reform, it's always difficult to know what's the key essential thing. What's the one step that you got to take that you don't have a reform without it? You know, what's the point at which if you don't get it, you got to say, this is no good. We go back, we go to the people, we fight, we start over again, and we get what we want. And there is no simple formula to answer that question. But one thing is true. Anytime a reform movement comes along that threatens the power, the privilege of the people who flourish, who get rich and fat by trampling on the rights of others and exploiting and taking advantage of people and lying, cheating, stealing, but doing it legally. Anytime you tread on their toes, anytime you say, hey, people need more rights and freedom and we're going to take it whether you like it or not, those powerful forces will come back and they'll offer what they call a compromise. They'll say, well, we see the merit of your reform, but you're trying too hard, you're asking too much. We can meet in the middle, isn't that reasonable? And the compromise that comes from the side of privilege and power is always designed cleverly to keep you from getting the key, critical, essential element of your reform, to discredit your reform, like our medical marijuana bill, in the so-called medical marijuana bill, medical cannabis law in Minnesota. That's something we worked on from 1991 to 2014, while people who could benefit from this natural herb suffered and died from AIDS and MS, daily problems like epilepsy or migraine headaches, chronic pain. Oh, living with chronic pain is a bitch. Well, all these people suffered, many of them died through the years while the legislature kowtowed to the law enforcement lobby. And law enforcement just didn't want to give an inch because they knew once the truth came out that cannabis was actually a beneficial herb, not a dangerous drug, that the whole legal fiction of marijuana prohibition would be undermined and subverted. And they didn't care that people were suffering. But when it got to the point when those mothers with their afflicted children were standing in front of the TV cameras, and it became apparent that some kind of medical cannabis law was what the people of Minnesota wanted so much that it made the power structure nervous. So they came back with a compromise, and they devised a medical cannabis system that at the time it was passed, was called the most user-unfriendly, the most patient-unfriendly, the most restrictive, complicated one of all the 24 states that had it. And of course, they made it complicated, they made it restricted, they made it expensive, they gave it to a monopoly to produce because they didn't really want it to work. They wanted to discredit the whole idea. And it is a tribute to the substance and the reality and the truth of what cannabis can do for people, that in spite of the fact that this Minnesota system was set up to fail, it has not completely failed. There are probably hundreds of thousands of people in this state who could benefit from medicinal cannabis, can't get it because they can't find a way to get into the program, or they can't afford the program if they were to get into it. In other states with better laws, many patients can grow their own, or their caregivers can grow cannabis for them, and that works just fine. Or they can go to dispensaries and get the product that they need, and that works pretty well too. There are some abuses, but they don't compare to the fact that people get the relief and they get off of so many of those pharmaceutical drugs. So,
There you go.
with the reform, you've got to figure out what is it, what's your real demand? What are you really fighting for? What's the thing that is you can't compromise on?